Japan in the 90s, teaching English to a wide variety of students. She is the co-author of several successful secondary titles and has also written articles, songs, and raps for many popular EFL magazines. She has contributed to a range of National Geographic learning programs, including Impact for middle school learners, Look and Imagine for young learners, and New Close-Up for teens and young adults. She has given presentations and run workshops in many countries around the world and conducts webinars from her home office in the UK. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Kath, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Can I just do a very quick check to make sure you can all hear me? Can you quickly type yes in the chat box if you can hear me? Fabulous. Thank you very much. Good. Lovely. Thank you so much, everyone, for turning up. I've seen a couple of people who say they're from the Philippines, and I'm sure it must be very late at night in the Philippines, but maybe I've got my timing wrong. Anyway, for anyone who's given up their time to come to this webinar, thank you. It is lovely to see people from so many different countries, and I really hope that we can share some ideas in the chat box. And yeah, you can help me out and give some of your ideas. And I will be keeping an eye on that chat box, and I will be asking you questions. So keep your ears open and listen out, and please participate, because it makes the whole session so much more fun. So I've called this talk Teaching the Whole Student, because I think that teaching the whole student, not just focusing on the academic things, is so important. But to start off my talk, before I go into that, I really want to ask you a question. So I'm going to get you to do some work right at the very beginning. And this is my question. Why did you become a teacher? So I want you to think about the thing that made you want to become a teacher when you first decided that's what you wanted to do. Just put in, one or two words that might tell everyone else why it was that you decided to become a teacher. And let's see what reasons. The buzz when someone gets it. Yep, love to teach children, good at explaining, passion to share, love for children, love working with kids and teenagers, human contact, benefiting the lives of others. My mum decided for me and I'm grateful now. Well, mothers are always right. Yeah, super. It's really interesting seeing all your ideas. So there have been several surveys in looking into why people become teachers. And it's very interesting because you find that around the world, just as we found right now, people tend to give very similar answers. So the answers that very, very few people give are things like the long holidays, the job security, or the pension. Now, some people mention them, but very, very few do. The reasons that are very commonly given around the world for teachers saying that why they wanted to become teachers: because I wanted to work with young people. Well, loads of you who've already put that up in the chat box. Because I wanted to contribute to society. Because I loved the subject. And again, I've seen that come up tons of times. And the number one reason that people mention more than anything else is because I wanted to make a difference to children's lives. So I suspect that most of us teachers are actually quite idealist. You have these wonderful ideals. You want to make a difference to children's lives. You want to contribute to society, and that is fantastic. I'm just going to show you one of those surveys to show you the results there. So this is from the Pearson survey that was taken, I think it was 2015. And you'll see there that in that infographic, the 93% of teachers who replied said that their main influence was that they wanted to make a difference to pupils' lives. So that's all fantastic. There you are, deciding to become teachers with all these wonderful ideals and dreams. And let's see what happens to those ideals and dreams. So the first thing is you start thinking, I want to make a difference to my students' lives, but of course you have to deal with your students' expectations. What are they expecting when they walk into the classroom? So some students walk into the classroom and they're really keen and they want to learn English and they're very excited. And there are other students who think, well, maybe if I sit at the back and keep very quiet, I can just have a little sleep for the next half an hour. Or perhaps they think, well, this is a great opportunity to have a chat to my friend. So not everyone is massively motivated to learn English. And that can affect the way that you teach. And sometimes it can affect how idealistic you feel about your dreams as a teacher. And then sitting on top of those students' expectations, of course, are your students' parents' expectations. And I'm sure that you've all had experience of wonderful, supportive, helpful, enthusiastic parents, but also some parents who maybe have unrealistic expectations, or some parents who had a bad experience of education themselves and don't actually take it that seriously. So that can all affect you as well. So your students' parents' expectations really need to be taken into consideration when you're trying to teach. And then on top of that, another weight that gets loaded onto you is your students' future employers' expectations. So I think, of course, you want to make a difference to your students' lives. And because you want to make a difference to your students' lives, you're thinking about how they're growing as people and how they're going to cope when they go out into the big wide world. And are you helping them to become employable? Are you helping them not just to get the qualifications that they need, but maybe the soft skills that they need as well? So all of those things you're kind of thinking about as well when you're teaching. And then on top of that, you have your school's expectations. So there's no doubt that every school wants the best for their students, but often what they really need as well is very good exam results, because it makes the school look good. And sometimes that can be a bit of a conflict. Sometimes you might feel, well, it's really difficult to get my students through the exams and to do all the other things I want to do to look after them. Plus, schools often expect you to fill in a lot of charts, to do a lot of assessment, to do a lot of report writing, and that's all important, but it's another burden for you, isn't it? It's another thing for you to do. And then, of course, the school has the government's expectations. So your government will have set certain guidelines. They will have certain expectations, what they expect you to teach. They might have decided on a national curriculum, which you have to follow. So that's something else that might be an extra thing that you have to bear in mind as a teacher. So you've got all these things weighing down on you, but of course you're still idealists and you're still trying to do the best and wanting to make a difference to your students' lives. And then finally, as if all that wasn't enough, 18 months ago, what happened? Lockdown. So, gosh, it's been a really tough time, hasn't it? And I think it's very, very important that we acknowledge that. It's been tough for all of us. It's been tough for you, it's been tough for your students. And I think it's, yes, as I say, it's important that we acknowledge it and that we take that into consideration. But at the same time, we don't want to lose sight of that ideal that we have, that we want to make a difference to our students' lives. And I'm not going to say that I can offer easy solutions to all this, but what I do believe really strongly is that there is a way we can pull something positive out of all that, because students have to live well in order to study well. They can't achieve academically if they're feeling miserable, or if they don't understand how to interact socially with other people, or if they're worried and anxious and don't have the tools inside them to deal with those things. Those are the basic first things they need, and they can't study without those being looked after. And the fantastic thing is that as English teachers, we can continue to teach English. We can prepare our students for academic success while also focusing on their overall well-being, focusing on the whole students. So we can make a difference to our students' lives. And I think Caitlin mentioned at the beginning of this talk that I've just finished working on a series of books called New Close-Up. And New Close-Up is basically an exam series, but it does have this little section at the end of every 2 units called Live Well, Study Well, because when we were developing New Close-Up, we thought even if your students really want to pass their exams, it's also so important to do something to address this issue of well-being, particularly in the current time. So I'm going to show you a few pages from that, and I'm just going to share some ideas about how we can help students with their well-being. Okay, so this is what I'm going to cover in the next 45 minutes. I'm going to talk about 3 ways that we can encourage positivity, 3 ways that we can develop soft skills, and 3 ways that we can help our students deal with difficult situations. So they all fall under that umbrella term of well-being. But of course, these will also all be ways that we're teaching English. So none of it is a waste of time. It's all very important. It's all helping our students learn English, but at the same time, also addressing this issue of their well-being. So let's start off with positivity. 3 ways to encourage positivity. So when I was preparing this talk, and we were right in the middle of lockdown, and things were really looking quite tough, I thought to myself, what is it that young people do, young teens, young adults, how are they managing to keep positive during lockdown? What are the things that they're doing? What are their hints? What are their tips? So I did a very unscientific survey. I asked my own kids, who were both teenagers. I asked friends who had young kids, or not that young, but teens. I have a big series of Facebook friends. A lot of them are teachers from many different countries. So I did a little survey of them, and I collected in all the results. And as I say, it's not hugely scientific, but it was very interesting to see that from all around the world, the same answers came back all over the place. The things that are making students feel positive, even during lockdown, even during really tough times. So I collated all this together and I made a little word cloud. And as you can see from this word cloud, the big words represent things that people keep mentioning. And the slightly smaller words, maybe the less popular things, but these things were mentioned all the time. So the number one thing that students were mentioning that really helped them stay positive was connecting with their friends. Really important. Other things they mentioned were getting outside, exercise, fresh air, walking the dog, that kind of thing. So being outside, being in nature, that's something else that really helps students and young people, in fact, everyone, feel positive. And the other thing that I picked out from this word cloud was a lot of mention of creative activities. So things like painting, doing craft activities, music, things like that. So those were the answers that I got back from students. And then I thought, right, how can we try and incorporate these into the classroom to teach English? So let's start off with connecting with friends, which I think is a very important way of getting students to remain positive. Now, it was very interesting when I was thinking about connecting with friends. I asked my daughters, my younger daughter, who's a very sociable girl, I noticed that she wasn't actually connecting with her friends very much during lockdown, even though she's got lots of friends and normally she goes out a lot and socializes with them. During lockdown, when she couldn't leave the house and she couldn't meet her friends, she wasn't even contacting them on social media. And I said to her, why not? What's the problem? Why are you not really connecting with your friends anymore? And she said, because I've got nothing to say to them because nothing's happening, which is really sad, but it's also true. So if everything in life seems to stop, suddenly it becomes more difficult to keep up connections with people because you haven't got so much to talk about. So I thought, well, how can we get our students practicing English, connecting with their friends, and giving them a reason to connect with their friends? So, for example, you can ask your students to contact 3 friends or 3 family members and ask them these kind of things. Tell you an interesting fact about themselves. Think of 3 adjectives to describe you. Tell you about a time they felt scared or excited or proud. Tell you what their last meal would be. Describe a friend of theirs whom you've never met. Tell you about a time they made a mistake. you can add your own ideas to that, and they might relate to the topic that you're covering at that time. But the idea is that you give your students a reason to actually go and talk to their friends, or a reason to go and talk to their family members. And they can do that in their first language. But the idea is then that they bring that back into the classroom, whether that's the real classroom or the online classroom, and they share what they've learnt with everyone else. So you're achieving two things. One is you're getting your students to look after their well-being, because you're getting them to reconnect with people and chat to them and talk to them. And the second thing is you're getting them then to practice their English, because they're then coming back and telling everyone else about what they found out. I see someone in the chat box was asking about last meal. Yeah, I guess it is kind of ominous, but it's exactly the kind of thing that really appeals to teenagers. I can guarantee you that. Yeah. Okay. So that's the first thing, connecting with friends and family members. Now, the next one is getting outside, even if you're just sticking your head out of the window. There've been all sorts of research into the power of nature and the power of being outside, in terms of how it affects your well-being and how positive it is on your well-being. And I know, being an immensely lazy person myself, I really need to be forced to go outside and do some exercise. And I'm very lucky because I've got 2 dogs, so I have absolutely no choice. Doesn't matter what the weather's like, I have to go outside and walk for 45 minutes every day. And it, even if it's pouring with rain and I really, really don't want to go outside, and I'd really far rather stay in my nice warm house, I have to go out. And as soon as I go out, I start to feel better. And I don't think that's just me. I think lots of people do. But you need to give your students a reason to go outside so that they can start feeling the positive effects. So here are some ways that you can give your students reasons to go outside. Even for the lowest level students, for your A1 students who are just beginning to learn words for things like colours, you can say, go outside and take a picture, take a photograph for every colour in the rainbow, or every colour that you've learnt the name of. So they take a picture, and then they bring that either back into the online classroom or the real classroom. They show their pictures, and you get the rest of the class, or they work in pairs, they get their partners to name the colours that they've seen. So you're getting them really to connect with outside, and to look at it and to think about it in a new and different way. Or you can give them letters of the alphabet. You could give each student a different letter of the alphabet and say, take some pictures for this letter, or take some pictures for the letters A to D. Again, bring them back into the classroom, see if everyone can guess what the letters are, see if they can guess what the words are. So again, you're getting them to observe and feel and be in nature. It's not just going out and walking, you're actually having to look around and think about it. And for your more advanced students, so students who are maybe about to do their first certificate, then you can get them to think about colloquial phrases or idioms. So I've given an example here, every cloud has a silver lining. You can give them something quite tricky like that and say, see if you can take a picture or a series of pictures to represent it, and then try and get the class to guess what the phrase is, which is much more challenging, but really good fun. So there we are. That's a way to get your students to go outside. Now, the third thing that I mentioned was being creative. So being creative or going with the flow. Now I'm going to show you just one of the pages that we use in New Close-Up. I mentioned that we have this strand called Live Well, Study Well. It comes after every 2 units. And this is what a page looks like. This happens to be about using your free time, but I wanted to just use a text from here to tell you about what we mean when we talk about going with the flow. It's really interesting. So this is, just click on this. There was an American-Hungarian psychologist called, now I always have to, you just bear with me a minute, I always have to check to make sure I get the pronunciation right. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. There we are, that's his name. And he did some study into creative activities. And what he found was that people are happier when they're busy, as long as they're doing something challenging. And so he invented this term flow, as in to be in the flow of something. And it means the pleasant experience of having enough interesting things to do that you don't notice time passing. And I'm sure you would have experienced that. Sometimes when you're so engaged in doing something, you don't even notice that time's passing, but it needs to be quite challenging. I mean, if you're just really busy sticking bits of paper in envelopes, that's not going to make the time go quickly. But if you're doing something creative and you're really involved in it and it's challenging, then you don't notice time passing. And doing nothing, on the other hand, can make us feel bored, guilty, and depressed. So creativity, important, very important for well-being. So here are just a few ideas for creativity. I'm sure anyway that you are, at times you ask your students to write stories. One way to make writing stories more interesting and more fun and more challenging is by putting some restrictions or constraints on it. So instead of saying something like, write a story about a journey you took, which is okay, it's fine. And if you're covering the language for transport, that might be very appropriate. If you put in some strange constraints to that, like write a story about a journey you took, which includes the words piano, tree, and banana, it makes it much more fun for students, more challenging, and they're forced to be more creative. So it's just one way that you can up the stakes a little bit with the creativity. Now, I don't know if you found this in your countries, wherever you're from, but I noticed during lockdown that as soon as we went into lockdown, everyone decided they were going to be amazing bakers and they were going to start making their own bread and making their own cakes. And when I went to the supermarket, all the flour had disappeared from the shelves and all the yeast had gone and all the baking powder. And it was very difficult to find those kind of baking ingredients. And I think young people love to create, they love to cook, they love to bake. So why don't we use that in a classroom situation? So here's something you can do. Ask them to find a healthy recipe in English. So they're using their reading skills, finding their healthy recipe. Then you add some ingredients in. So I've just put a cabbage, a pepper, and some cheese. So some nice healthy ingredients there. Then tell them to change some of those ingredients. So they're making their own version. So that's the creative part. Then they write that out, take a photograph, and explain why it's healthy. So this is a nice activity because they're reading, they're writing, they're creating, and they're also thinking about healthy eating. So that's another real positive. And they've got that creative part, so it's a really positive thing for them to do. Or of course, art. I mean, I'm useless at art. No one can ever tell what I've drawn once I've drawn it because I'm so hopeless, but I still quite enjoy doing it. And I think many young people do. So put a positive spin on it, make it something personal to them. Just ask them to do something like draw a picture of something you love, a person, a pet, a possession, a view, and then write a few short sentences to say why you love it. So that's just another way to get creativity and positivity into your students' lives. Okay, so we have talked about 3 ways to add positivity into the classroom, and that's by getting your students to stay connected, to get outside, and to go with the flow. So I'm now going to move on to the second section of the talk, which was about developing soft skills. So I'm sure you know what we mean by soft skills. We mean those kind of things that enable us to interact with society, to play our part in society, to get on with people, to communicate. It's sort of understanding nonverbal signals, working together as a team, that kind of thing. Those are soft skills. They make your students very, very employable. Yes, caring, human dimensions, exactly. Thank you in the chat box. So I picked out 3 soft skills, and I thought we can look at ways that we can help to develop that. And the first of those is teamwork. Teamwork is very, very important, increasingly important. I think it's one of those things that can't be done by machines, and that is when we learn to listen to each other and to communicate with each other and to work together in teams. So in New Close-Up, in our Live Well, Study Well strand, we wanted to cover that. So I'm going to show you a page just so that you can see how it works in the book. So here is our Live Well, Study Well page from B1, Unit 1. And this is about being a team player and having confidence in yourself. So we start off by just using this little infographic to explain to students the different things that they need in order to work in a team. So they need to be able to respect other people, to communicate, to listen, to support each other, to do their share, and to be reliable. So those are the characteristics that they need in order to work in a team. And then they'll do a little bit of work on that. They'll do some language work on that. They'll do some discussion. And then we move on to this other section, which is called Mind Your Mind. You can see that on the top right-hand column of that. So let me just show you what the Mind Your Mind is. So Mind Your Mind is really diving deeper into one particular strategy that students can use. And this strategy is all about having confidence in yourself. And you'll know that if you work in teams, it's very important to be self-confident. It can be tempting sometimes to sit back and let other people speak and to keep quiet. But a team really needs for everyone to communicate and for everyone to listen. So these are just a few tips for students about how it's difficult to work in a team if you're quiet or not confident, but you have to remember that everybody's important and everybody has something worth saying. You shouldn't be afraid to share your ideas. And equally, it's important to listen to other people and to encourage quiet team members to speak up. And of course, a good team has a lot of different skills. And then finally, on this page, we always have a couple of projects. Now, usually the projects, there are two projects, and usually one of the projects is a group or a team activity, and one of them is a working individually activity, so that if students prefer to work on their own, they have that choice. But obviously on a page where our whole focus is teamwork, we decided to go with two projects about teamwork. And I'm sure if you have a look at this first one, it will be one that you're very familiar with. It's always a very popular game to use in the classroom, and that is the desert island game, where you work in teams. You imagine you're in a desert island. You have a list of different items that you can have, and you have to rank them in order from the most important to the least important. And then you present your order to the class and you explain your reasons. Or there's an alternative project. So you could also choose project 2, where students work together in teams and they make a plan of action on how they can raise money for a group in their community. So they have to think about what they could do, the strengths of each team member, and how to divide up the tasks. So that's just one page. As I say, that's from B1, and it shows you how we encourage students to think about being team players while at the same time also practicing their English. Now, the next slide I'm coming to is all about resilience. And I couldn't resist, when I was thinking about resilience, I couldn't resist just including this little video clip, because this video clip explains exactly how I managed to get through lockdown, and perhaps you felt the same way. And I think it's a very good way of summing up what resilience is all about.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Oh,
Dory.
I love to swim in.
Dory.
When you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm gonna get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Sorry.
Right. So I think that is, yeah, and that's, Caitlin, you tell your kids to just keep swimming all the time. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great thing to have in the back of your mind. Just keep swimming, just keep going. You're not going to give up. You're just going to make it through to the end. So while I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking, now, how can we incorporate that into the classroom? How can we get our students to think about resilience? And really what I wanted to think about is resilience in the face of problems and anxiety and worries. So here are a couple of ideas. Now, the first one, which is where you are asking your students to work individually, I would say you need to know your students very well, and you need to be confident that they're going to be comfortable with doing this, working on their own. So if you're not so sure, then go with the second activity, but I'm going to talk you through the first one. So the first one, you ask your students on their own to sit down and think about a problem that they're trying to deal with at the moment. It could be any problem at all. It could be a problem related to school. It could be a problem at home. They think about their problem. They write it down. It's very important to write down your problem. It's a way of getting it out from there onto there and acknowledging it and naming it. And then they write a list of small steps they can take to deal with that problem. So rather than thinking, oh, it's so overwhelming, I can't deal with it, it's a huge problem, you think, okay, I can't deal with a big problem, but I can just deal with this first little bit by doing this, and then that little bit. And for each little step, you get a small reward. And once students have worked that out and they can write it down anonymously on a piece of paper, they can then share that with the class. So one way you can do that, which is quite fun, is you can get them to crumple up the piece of paper, throw it into the middle of the class, and then get everyone to go and pick up a piece of paper and read what different people have written. But some students may just not want to share their problems at all. They may feel very anxious that perhaps they can be identified. It may not be appropriate, in which case you do the second option. So you work in groups. You start off with the whole class and you ask them as a class to brainstorm some general problems that they've been dealing with, or general problems that they think other teens might have to deal with. So you get a big list of ideas, put that up on the board, then you put your class into groups and you give each group one problem. And then they do the same thing. So as a group, they have to create a list of small steps and possible rewards. And then they can swap their problems and comment on each other's ideas. So again, you know, tons of practice of English in all that, lots of communication, lots of listening, lots of speaking, some writing as well, but also you're giving them some tools, you're teaching them how they can deal with problems, how they can develop their own resilience. So it's never a waste of time to do something like this. It always has a positive impact. Now, the third soft skill that I want to talk about is critical thinking. So critical thinking is, I'm sure you will all know, it's one of those 21st century skills. It's one of those buzzwords you hear all the time, isn't it? Critical thinking. And I think sometimes it's a little bit, it can be a little bit of a struggle to know actually what it means, critical thinking. I tend to think that critical thinking is all about asking the questions. It's all about asking the right questions. And I do think that critical thinking is hugely important. And we've all seen in the last 18 months, there's been so much confusion everywhere about what's the truth and what isn't the truth, what counts as people's opinions and what counts as facts. And the more that we get our news from social media or from sort of my friend who told me that their friend who told me that their cousin did this and that worked, and so that's you know, that's a really good idea to do that. You know, the more that we get our information from that, the more we need to really apply those critical thinking skills in order to be absolutely sure that the information we're taking in is correct and fair and balanced. So as I say, it's all about asking the right questions. So I've just put together, these are the basic questions I think you need to get your students to ask whenever they look at a piece of information. If they're watching a video, if they're looking at a TikTok, if they're looking at a whatever it is, wherever they're finding their piece of information, they need to think about these things as proper critical thinkers, as 21st century people. And the things they need to ask, the questions they need to ask are, where does it come from? Really important. What's the source? Who wrote it? What is it saying? So what is it actually, what is the message that it's actually trying to give? How did it get this information? So if it's claiming to be some information from scientists, does it actually give its own sources? Does it say where it comes from? Why is it giving this information? So does it have its own agenda? And that goes back to maybe where does it come from? Who's the publisher? And when was it published, of course, because it's pointless finding really useful scientific information that was published 20 years ago and is no longer in date. So those are really important questions that you need to maybe have up in your classroom on a big piece of paper so that students remember to ask them every single time they come up against a piece of information. And there are also some really fun online games that you can point to your students towards, you can use with your students, where they will be asked them to read articles and then they have to identify whether they think the news is fake or not, or how reliable that source of information is. So I've given you a couple of links there, Factitious and News Literacy, which is a Canadian website. There are also some BuzzFeed fake news quizzes. So what I would say, particularly with the BuzzFeed ones, is that they're often not appropriate for younger students. So you would do this anyway, because you're all committed, wonderful teachers, but obviously never point your students towards anything without having read it very thoroughly yourself first. There are some fantastic fake news quizzes, and then there are some that are really completely inappropriate for the classroom. So check them out first. And also BBC Bite Size. If you do a search on BBC Bite Size fake news, that again comes up with some great quizzes that you can use in the classroom, and they're relatively low level as well. So it's just a great way of getting your students to think critically. Now, as a writer for National Geographic Learning, I can't let the opportunity of showing a few fabulous photos pass, because of course the great thing about writing for National Geographic Learning is that we have access to all these wonderful photos, these wonderful stories from National Geographic explorers from all around the world, and we've used a lot of those photographs and stories in New Close Up. So I wanted to share one of the pictures, one of the stories with you, and then I'm going to challenge you to use your critical thinking skills to work out some details about this story. So get ready to put your answers in the chat box, get your critical thinking skills sharpened and ready to work. Let me show you this photo. So this is from B1, New Close Up B1. And you can see that it's from a unit called Life Lessons. And I want you to look at that photograph and use all the clues in that photograph to tell me where you think it was taken. So which country do you think this might be? Which country do you think this photograph was taken in? South Africa, okay. Africa, USA, India, Kenya, Australia, Ecuador. Oh, I can't keep up now, you're going too fast. So yeah. I mean, I think you've all immediately assumed it's not going to be Europe, is it? It's very unlikely to be Europe. And there are a number of things that someone said France, but let me tell you the clues that you can use to tell you. First of all, they are wearing fairly summery clothes. It looks like the climate's quite warm. I'm looking at the plant as well, the flowers. They look quite maybe tropical. Then, of course, there's the ethnicity of the children, but children of any ethnicity can be in any country, but that might point you towards somewhere that's maybe not Europe, but it might not be. You can look at the shutters. I mean, that would tell me immediately it couldn't be the UK because we don't really have shutters in the UK. So there are all sorts of clues that you can use from this photograph that might help you to decide where it was taken. I'm going to tell you where it was taken in a minute. But the next thing I want you to think about is, what's the animal? I'm sure you can answer that very quickly. What animal is that they're holding? Flamingo. Thank you, Christopher. Yeah, absolutely. Do you think the flamingo is real or fake? Who was going to say duck? Who? Okay, fake, real, fake, real. Okay, so I would say we've got quite a balance there. It stays too still. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna give you your answers now. This photograph was actually taken, there was no way you could have guessed this. It was actually taken on the Dutch Caribbean island of Curacao. Okay, so it's on a Dutch Caribbean island. It is a real flamingo. It's a real flamingo, And this flamingo is called Flamingo Bob. So there's a lovely story about Flamingo Bob. Flamingo Bob in 2016 crashed into a hotel window and was knocked out. And he was a very lucky flamingo because someone picked him up and took him to the local vet on this Dutch Caribbean island of Curacao. And the local vet was more than just a vet. Odette Durst actually runs a wildlife rehabilitation center. She's an amazing woman. So she had a look at this flamingo and she restored him to health. She called him Flamingo Bob. But she realized that he was never going to be able to live in the wild again because he did have some long-term injuries. And in fact, those long-term injuries she thought probably came from perhaps having been injured from plastic on the beach or plastic in the ocean. So he couldn't really fly very well. And yeah, someone said, it's amazing how she takes him to schools. That's right, that's what she does. So Odette Durst looks after Flamingo Bob and she takes him into schools, and she uses Flamingo Bob to tell the students all about how important it is to look after our wildlife, how important it is to keep our beaches and our oceans clean, and just generally the sort of to promote the values of respect for the wildlife and respect for nature and looking after the environment. And of course, and I'm sure you would find it too, it's so much more real than reading statistics in a newspaper article or even watching a video. Actually having a live animal, something as extraordinary, beautiful as a flamingo, coming into your classroom is going to be really, really exciting for your students. So yeah, that's the story. And in the book, we then get our students to use their critical thinking skills. So we tell them Bob is a rescued flamingo whose owner uses him to help people think about nature and the environment. And then how might a bird like this teach people to change their habits? So you're really getting students to use those critical thinking skills. Or what other animals do you think could be used in schools to teach children about life outside school? In the UK, we have quite a few therapy animals in schools, actually. My two girls in their secondary school, there was a therapy dog called Bailey, I think, and therapy dog was used with children who struggled to read. So any children who struggled to read would go and sit with the therapy dog and they would read to the therapy dog, and it would make them feel very calm and it would make them feel very happy and they wouldn't feel stressed about it. But anyway, that's me getting sidetracked, sorry. So we've talked about soft skills and we have talked about teamwork. We've talked about resilience, breaking those problems down into small steps, and we've talked about critical thinking, asking the right questions. So I'm going to move on to the third part of my talk now. And this is, click on it, 3 ways to deal with difficult situations and negative thoughts. And we all have those. So it's very useful to learn different ways of dealing with them. This is useful for us as well as for our students. So the first one is actually a meditation technique. It's a technique that I use, I found very effective, but it also happens to be a really good way of practicing English. And I call it find your happy place. So this is how it works. You have to think of a place that makes you feel happy. Now, it could be a real place. It could be a place that you remember from your childhood, or it could just be a place that you create for yourself. But it has to be a place that is really strongly connected with happiness. Can everyone still hear me? Sorry, I just seemed to lose connection for a moment. Can I just ask you to put yes in the box if you can still hear me? Okay, fine, good. Sorry, you just all disappeared for a moment and I had a panic. Right, back to our place to make us feel happy. So for me, I like to think of a beach. All right, that's the place that makes me feel happy. And it's my own imaginary beach. It's a perfect beach. The really important thing for your students is that you ask them to focus on every single detail to make it really, really real in their heads. So you can start off with, how did you get there? How did you arrive at this place? Did you walk there? Did you get parachuted there? And then you can ask them to think about what they can see, not just what's in front of you, but what can you see if you turn your head? What's behind you? So think about it all the way around you. What can you see? Then imagine that you're putting your hand out. What can you touch? What can you feel? If you're on a beach, what does the sand feel like? Can you feel the sand on your feet? Or if you're in a forest, what do the leaves feel like? What can you smell? Smell's a really important way of evoking a place. So can you imagine the smell? So for me in the beach, I would have that smell of suntan lotion, and I would have that kind of salty smell of the sea. And someone's put under the Christmas trees, you have that fantastic piney smell of Christmas trees. And then what can you hear? Can you hear bird song? Can you hear children laughing? Can you hear a river? So it is a good idea for teaching the 5 senses. But the really lovely thing is, it's like a gift you're giving to your students, because once you've got them to create this place where they're really happy and they have complete control over it, it's entirely up to them what their place looks like, then they'll always have that. It will always be inside them, and it will be a place they can go to when they feel overwhelmed, or when they feel that life's just moving too fast, or when they're feeling very anxious, or if they're in an exam and they're suddenly panic stricken. You just think, right now I'm going to go to my happy place, and I'm just going to spend 30 seconds in my happy place, and that's going to calm me down. So it works really well. And if you haven't tried it for yourself, try it for yourselves first. And then if you find that works, try it out with your students. I often use it if I can't sleep at night. And if I can't sleep because I'm worrying about work, or I'm worrying about my kids, and I've got too many thoughts going on in my head, I have to do something to stop all the thoughts. So I create my happy place. All right, so that's my meditation tip. The next one is about screen time. So screen time is often seen very negatively, I think, and I think that's a shame. And as I have 2 teenage daughters myself, I can tell you that they are completely fed up of hearing people telling them to switch their screens off, or telling them that they look at screens too much, or, oh, young people, all they ever do is look at their screens. That's a very negative way of looking at screens, and it's a negative way of thinking about young people, because there are lots and lots of positives about screens as well. And that's why I've put in this managing your screen time, not reducing it, how to use it well, and when to switch it off. So let's look at some of those positives of screen time. Because as educators, and you've had to find these in the last 18 months because of lockdown, there are so many fantastic apps and games and things that you can do online that can really be very educational and motivating. So I've put a few ideas here. I'm sure that you've got your own ideas as well. Quizlet and Kahoot to start off with. Great way of making quizzes. You can use them to make quizzes, but also get your students to make their own quizzes. They can use those as revision resources. It's really useful, and they can then share them with their classmates. So that's just one little idea. All those quiz things, there are other ones as well. There's a very nice app called Padlet, which you probably know, and that's like a kind of online notice board. So it's a nice way of brainstorming ideas, where you get your students to put their ideas on Padlet. I've also used it when I've asked my students to send postcards. So you say, right, I want you to send me a postcard, but send it onto the notice board like Padlet. Put down your idea, and let's see what it is. I haven't mentioned it on here, but Mentimeter, which is something that I've only recently started to use, is a really, really useful way of sharing ideas and creating team effort ideas together. And word clouds, like you saw the word cloud that I made at the beginning of this talk, which is all about positive things. One of the websites is word art. You just type in the different words and it creates nice word clouds for you. It's a nice way to plan writing or review lexical sets or list strategies. So all those kind of things. And the other thing is, you know, your students are digital natives, and they probably have some great ideas themselves. So there's some lovely ideas coming up on the chat box as well. So thank you so much for sharing them. That's really helpful. That's what I love to see. So yeah, but ask your students as well. Ask them to think of ways that they can use their screen in an educational way. But also we want to give them an opportunity to switch off their screens. And so we can think of some activities that maybe start off by thinking of screens and then you move away from them. So this first one is about creating a workout routine. So I don't know if you're aware of a PE teacher called Joe Wicks. So he's called the body coach, I think. Anyway, he does tons of workouts online on YouTube. And during the lockdown, he basically did one every single morning, UK time, for kids. And he would dress up in silly clothes and he would have crazy music and he was full of enthusiasm and he went absolutely viral, and literally hundreds of thousands of people all around the world would watch his workout routines. So you can get your students to find a workout routine in English on the screen, find it on YouTube or something, watch it, then switch off the screen and create their own workout routine and film it with English instructions. So they're using parts of the body, they're using the imperative, they're using action verbs, but they're also just stepping away from the screen a bit and doing something quite nice and active. I talked earlier about sending postcards to Padlet, but why not get your students to send an actual real life postcard? It may be something that your students haven't done at all. I mean, I don't think my kids, my two daughters, have sent that many actual letters or postcards because everything is done by email or text message. So it might be quite fun for them to actually write and send a postcard from their imaginary best holiday, and then get them to stick a stamp on it and go and take it to their local post box and make sure that it actually gets sent. And of course, if you don't want to give your address to your students, they can send a postcard to their school, or you can ask them to send a postcard to a friend or their grandma or someone else. But it's just something that's away from doing all their messages on the screen. Or draw a diagram of your dream house and label it, something that's actually quite difficult to do unless you're very good with using drawing apps. But in fact, getting a pencil and a piece of paper and labeling it is a nice way of revising rooms of the house, but also getting your kids to move their faces away from the screen. Okay, I'm on to my very last slide. Well, not my last slide, my last idea. And this is about taking ownership. Okay, so taking ownership, you can make a difference. And this kind of links back to resilience. It's about when you have a problem, particularly those kind of big problems like climate change or the environment or the pandemic, where you just think, this is so huge, I can't cope, and it's really scary. Then the idea is that you show your students a way that they can take ownership of that problem. So I'm going to show you another page from a Live Well, Study Well page. This again is from B1. And this is about the environment. So it gives students just some little tips on how they can personally make a difference by eating less meat, changing the way they travel, using less plastic, becoming a volunteer. And then, as I said before, we then do a deep dive into a strategy they can use. So this strategy is about achieving change. You start with a small goal. That's why I said it's similar to the resilience thing. Start with a small goal, make sure it's something you can really do, make it achievable. You know, you can't clean up the whole river, but maybe you can clean up a couple of meters of it. And talk to a friend or relative and share your goals. So when you share goals, you're much more likely to try and get to them, because then you're letting down other people as well as yourself if you don't. Positive changes might be difficult to start with. Don't give up if you have a bad day. So all some top tips. And then of course we go on to the projects. And here you can see an example of a group project discussing how you can encourage your friends to change their habits to help the environment, and a project that they can do on their own. Make a poster that gives people 5 tips for changing their habits to help the environment. Okay, so those are all my ideas that I've shared with you. I'm glad that I've made you feel positive. Thank you, Marina. Just to sum up, we talked about ways to encourage positivity by staying connected, getting outside, creating things, developing the soft skills of teamwork, resilience, critical thinking, dealing with difficult situations by finding your happy place, managing a screen time, and taking ownership. And so why do we need to teach the whole student? And how are we going to make a difference to our students' lives? Well, I believe that when we focus on the whole student, we can make a difference, because when students live well, they study well, because emotionally stable, happy, positive students learn better. And when we prepare students for life, we prepare them for success, both inside and outside the classroom. And we can make a difference to our students' lives. So thank you so much for listening, for taking part, for all your amazing comments. I'm just going to put up here the title of the book that I referred to, and I'm going to hand back over to Caitlin.
Thanks, Kath. I know I feel better already. Thank you for that. And thanks again to everyone that joined today. Before you leave, I have just a few things to mention. Right after the session, you'll be directed to a feedback survey, so please do let us know what you thought. And if you're interested in learning more about New Close-Up in your classroom, please visit the website, and I'm going to drop that in the chat box right there, and you can link directly. Or you can contact your local National Geographic Learning representative, and I'll put that link right in the chat box as well. And be sure to join our National Geographic Learning online community for teachers of English on our social media channels, where we'll offer up-to-date information about events, practical classroom tips, and exciting real-world content, as well as, of course, new product information. So thank you all so much. Live well. And thanks, Kath, once more. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Caitlin.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.